The cold autumn wind whipped through Willow Creek, making Penelope Lambert clutch her shawl tighter around her swollen belly as she approached the bustling market square. At 6 months pregnant and recently widowed, she had barely enough coins in her pocket for a loaf of bread to last the week. The year was 1876, and the Colorado Territory was no place for a woman alone. Penelope had come west with her husband Thomas 2 years prior, full of dreams and plans for their future. Now, she stood alone, her calloused hands resting protectively over the child that would never know its father. "Fresh bread. Get your fresh bread," called the baker, his voice carrying over the din of the Saturday market. Horses snorted and stomped in the nearby hitching posts while townsfolk haggled over goods. Penelope made her way cautiously through the crowd, one hand on her belly, the other gripping her worn leather coin purse. She had almost reached the baker's stall when a large man in an expensive coat shoved past her, sending her stumbling backward. "Watch where you're standing, woman," he growled, not even bothering to look back as Penelope struggled to keep her balance. Her ankle twisted beneath her, and she would have fallen hard onto the dirt road if not for the strong arm that suddenly appeared behind her back, steadying her. "Easy there, madam," came a deep voice, warm like honey but firm as iron. "I've got you." Penelope looked up to see the most striking blue eyes she'd ever encountered, set in a sun-bronzed face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The man who held her was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in the practical attire of a working cowboy, worn denim, leather vest, and boots that had seen many miles. "Thank you," she whispered, regaining her footing, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Isaac Young," he said simply, tipping his hat. His eyes flicked to her pregnant belly, then back to her face with a respectful nod. "And that fella needs a lesson in manners." Before Penelope could respond, Isaac had stepped around her, his long strides quickly closing the distance to the man who'd pushed her. The market seemed to quiet as people sensed the confrontation brewing. "Mr." Isaac called, his voice carrying the authority of a man who rarely needed to raise it. "You owe the lady an apology." The well-dressed man turned, his face twisted with annoyance. "Mind your own business, cowboy. When you nearly knock down a pregnant woman, you make it my business," Isaac replied evenly, his hand resting casually near the holster at his hip. It wasn't a threatening gesture, merely a reminder of its presence. The man looked from Isaac to Penelope, then around at the gathered crowd. Whatever calculation he made behind his eyes led him to tip his hat stiffly in Penelope's direction. "My apologies, madam," he said without sincerity before turning away. Isaac watched him go, then returned to Penelope's side. "You all right, madam?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, still flustered by both the incident and the cowboy's intervention. "I just need to purchase my bread before the baker sells out." Together they approached the baker's stall, where only 2 loaves remained. Penelope reached for her coin purse, counting out the few pennies she had saved. "That'll be 15 cents, Mrs. Lambert," said the baker, eyeing her sympathetically. Penelope's heart sank as she counted only 12 cents in her palm. She had miscalculated. "I'm sorry, I seem to be short," she began, embarrassment burning her cheeks. Without hesitation, Isaac placed a quarter on the counter. 2 loaves, he said, nodding to the baker. "Oh, but I couldn't," Penelope protested. "Please," Isaac said quietly. "It would be my honor." The baker wrapped both loaves in paper and handed them to Penelope with a smile. She clutched them to her chest, the warm bred a stark contrast to the cool autumn air. "Thank you, Mr. Young," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." "No need for repayment, Mrs. Lambert," he replied, his voice gentle. "Though I'd be honored to carry those loaves home for you if you'd allow it." Penelope hesitated. She'd been managing on her own since Thomas died in the mining accident 3 months ago, stubbornly refusing the charity of neighbors who themselves had little to spare. But something about Isaac Young's straightforward kindness disarmed her. "I live just at the edge of town," she said finally. "It's not far." As they walked, Penelope stealing glances at the tall cowboy beside her, she couldn't help but wonder what twist of fate had brought him to her side at that precise moment in the market. Little did she know that this chance encounter would change both their lives forever. Isaac adjusted his stride to match Penelope's slower pace, noticing how she occasionally winced when putting weight on her right ankle. "That ankle troubling you?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "It's nothing," she insisted, though her slight limp told a different story. "Begging your pardon, madam, but it doesn't look like nothing." He stopped walking. "Would you allow me to take a look? I've tended to my share of sprains on the trail." Penelope hesitated, then nodded, allowing Isaac to guide her to a bench outside the general store. He knelt before her and gently examined her ankle, his touch professional and respectful. "It's starting to swell," he observed. "We should get some cold water on it soon." As they continued their walk to her small house at the edge of town, Isaac discreetly slowed their pace further, occasionally offering his arm when the path grew uneven. Penelope found herself studying him from the corner of her eye, the way the autumn sunlight caught in his dark brown hair, the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested a man who smiled often. "Have you lived in Willow Creek long, Mrs. Lambert?" he asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "Almost 2 years," she replied. "My husband Thomas and I came west from Pennsylvania after we married. He found work in the Silver Peak mine." She paused, swallowing the lump that formed in her throat whenever she spoke of Thomas. "He died in a cave 3 months ago." Isaac's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm truly sorry for your loss, madam." "Thank you," she said quietly, "and please call me Penelope." "Penelope," he repeated, as if testing how the name felt on his tongue. "A beautiful name." They approached a small but well-kept cabin with a vegetable garden to one side and a chicken coop to the other. A single horse dozed in a modest corral. "This is me," Penelope said, stopping at the gate. Isaac handed her the bread loaves. "You've made a fine home here." "It's modest, but it's ours," she caught herself. "Mine now, I suppose." An awkward silence fell between them, neither quite ready to part ways. "Mr. Young, Isaac, please." "Isaac," she corrected with a small smile. "Would you care for a cup of coffee? It's the least I can offer for your help today." The cowboy's face brightened. "I'd be much obliged." Inside the cabin was simple but meticulously maintained. A small table with 2 chairs occupied one corner, a cast iron stove another. A curtain separated what appeared to be a sleeping area from the main room. "Please sit," Penelope said, gesturing to the table as she busied herself with the coffee pot. She moved with practiced efficiency despite her swollen belly and sore ankle. "You mentioned the Silver Peak mine," Isaac said as she worked. "I just took a job with them, starting Monday as a foreman." Penelope nearly dropped the coffee pot. "The Silver Peak. But that's where, I know," he said gently. "And I want you to know they've made changes since the accident. New support beams, better safety protocols. The company brought me in specifically because of my experience with safer mining practices." She set 2 steaming cups on the table and eased herself into a chair. "It was a good job," she said after a moment. "Thomas was proud to work there. The pay was fair. The mine owner, Mr. Sullivan, speaks highly of your husband," Isaac said. "Says he was one of the best men he had." A small, sad smile touched Penelope's lips. "Thomas was a good man. He was so excited about the baby." Her hand instinctively moved to her belly. "He'll never get to meet his child." Isaac looked down at his coffee cup. I lost my wife and son 5 years ago. Fever took them both within a week of each other. Penelope's eyes widened. I'm so sorry. It changes you, he said simply. Losing those you love. They sat in companionable silence, two people who understood grief in a way that words couldn't fully express. What brought you to Willow Creek? Penelope asked finally. A fresh start, Isaac replied. I was ranching in Wyoming, but after Sarah and little James passed, the place felt too empty. I've worked mines before, learned about safer ways of shoring up tunnels. When I heard Silver Peak was hiring a new foreman to improve safety, it seemed like the right move. As they talked, the afternoon sun began its descent toward the mountains. Penelope realized with surprise that they had been conversing for hours, moving from grief to lighter topics: her garden, his travels, books they had both read. I should get going, Isaac said eventually, rising from the table. You should rest that ankle. Penelope walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. Thank you again for everything today. It was my pleasure, Penelope, he said, his blue eyes warm. Perhaps I might call on you again, maybe Sunday after church. A flutter that had nothing to do with the baby moved through Penelope's chest. I'd like that, she said softly. Isaac tipped his hat and stepped out into the fading light. Penelope watched him go, one hand resting on her belly where the baby kicked as if in approval. Well, she whispered to her unborn child, that was unexpected. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost painting delicate patterns on Penelope's window. She woke earlier than usual, her thoughts immediately turning to the tall cowboy with the kind eyes. She shook her head at her own foolishness. One chance meeting and a pleasant conversation didn't mean anything, she told herself as she prepared for the day. She was collecting eggs from her small henhouse when she heard the approach of a horse. Looking up, she was surprised to see Isaac dismounting from a handsome chestnut gelding. Good morning, he called, tipping his hat. I hope I'm not intruding. Penelope straightened, conscious of her simple work dress and hair loosely tied back. Not at all. I'm just doing my morning chores. I was on my way to inspect the mine before my official start tomorrow and thought I'd check on your ankle, he explained, leading his horse to the fence. That's very thoughtful, she replied, feeling oddly flustered. It's much better today. Would you like some breakfast? I was about to make eggs. Isaac's smile warmed his entire face. I'd be honored. Over breakfast, Penelope found herself opening up about her life in ways she hadn't with anyone since Thomas died. She told Isaac about growing up as a schoolteacher's daughter in Pennsylvania, about meeting Thomas at a church social, and their decision to seek opportunity in the West. Thomas had such dreams, she said, her voice wistful. He planned to work the mine for 5 years, save every penny, then buy land and start a cattle ranch. A good dream, Isaac commented. Solid. And you, she asked, was ranching always your calling? Isaac considered this as he sipped his coffee. I was born to it. My father ran cattle in Texas. After the war, I struck out on my own, worked my way north, had a nice spread in Wyoming when I married Sarah. His eyes grew distant. After I lost them, I sold it all, couldn't bear to stay. And now you're a mining foreman, Penelope observed. Life takes unexpected turns, he agreed. I learned about mining safety during a stint in California. Turns out I have a knack for seeing where tunnels might fail before they do. A knack that might have saved Thomas, Penelope thought but didn't say. Instead, she found herself studying Isaac's hands, strong and capable, yet gentle when he'd examined her ankle. After breakfast, Isaac insisted on helping with her morning chores before heading to the mine. Together they fed the chickens, tended to her horse, and harvested the last of the season's vegetables from her garden. You've done well here, Isaac commented, looking around the small homestead. "Managing all this alone can't be easy." "I take it day by day," Penelope replied, resting a hand on her lower back to ease the ache. "The neighbors help when they can." Isaac's eyes lingered on her pregnant form. "How much longer until the baby comes?" "About 3 months, the doctor thinks. Mid-January." A shadow crossed Isaac's face. "Winter births are hard." "I know," she said quietly, "but I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Young." His expression softened. "Of that, Mrs. Lambert, I have no doubt." When it was time for him to leave, Penelope found herself reluctant to see him go. She stood at the gate, watching as he mounted his horse with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. "I'll see you at church tomorrow?" he asked, looking down at her. "Yes," she replied, suddenly aware of how much she was looking forward to it. "Until then," he said, tipping his hat before turning his horse toward the road that led to the mine. Penelope watched him ride away, one hand absently stroking her belly as the baby moved within her. "He seems nice," she whispered to her unborn child. "But we're doing just fine on our own, aren't we?" As if in response, the baby kicked firmly against her palm. Sunday morning brought a flurry of activity as Penelope prepared for church. She found herself taking extra care with her appearance, pinning her honey-brown hair into a neat bun, and choosing her best maternity dress, a dark blue wool that Thomas had always said brought out the green in her eyes. "This is silly," she told her reflection in the small mirror. He was just being kind to a widow. But even as she chided herself, she couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation she felt at seeing Isaac again. The church was already filling when Penelope arrived. She slipped into her usual pew, exchanging polite nods with familiar faces. Mrs. Wilson, the blacksmith's wife, smiled warmly and moved over to make room for her. "Beautiful morning," Mrs. Wilson commented. "Though they say snow's coming by week's end." "My garden's ready for winter," Penelope replied, automatically falling into the rhythm of pre-service small talk. She was listening to Mrs. Wilson's concerns about her youngest son's cough when she felt a shift in the atmosphere of the small church. Looking up, she saw Isaac entering, hat in hand, his tall frame commanding attention without effort. He traded his work clothes for a clean white shirt, dark vest, and string tie, simple but dignified. Their eyes met across the room, and Isaac offered a small smile and nod before taking a seat several rows behind her. Penelope turned back to face the front, aware of the curious glances from those who had witnessed their exchange. Throughout the service, Penelope found it difficult to concentrate on Reverend Miller's sermon. She was acutely conscious of Isaac's presence behind her, wondering if he was watching her, then scolding herself for such vain thoughts. When the final hymn ended and the congregation began to disperse, Penelope gathered her things slowly, uncertain whether to wait for Isaac or proceed outside. The decision was made for her when Mrs. Wilson caught her arm. "Penelope, dear, who is that handsome man who can't take his eyes off you?" the older woman asked with a knowing smile. "Mr. Young is new in town," Penelope explained, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "He's the new foreman at Silver Peak." "Is he indeed?" Mrs. Wilson's eyes twinkled. "Well, he's coming this way now." Isaac approached, hat still in hand. "Good morning, Mrs. Lambert," he said, then nodded politely to Mrs. Wilson. "Madam." Mrs. Wilson beamed at them both. "I'll leave you young folks to chat," she said, patting Penelope's arm before moving away with remarkable speed for a woman of her years. "You look lovely today," Isaac said once they were relatively alone. "Thank you," Penelope replied, adjusting her shawl. "You clean up well yourself, Mr. Young." He grinned at that, a flash of white teeth against his tanned skin. "I was hoping I might walk you home," he said, Perhaps we could stop for dinner at the hotel restaurant first. I hear they serve a fine Sunday roast. Penelope hesitated. Dining in public with a man not her husband would certainly set tongues wagging in the small town. Reading her thoughts, Isaac added, I understand if you'd prefer not to. Small towns have long memories and longer tongues. His understanding only made her like him more. Actually, she decided, I would be delighted to join you for dinner, Mr. Young. His smile broadened. Isaac, he reminded her. Isaac, she echoed, returning his smile. The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Willow Creek, which wasn't saying much. Still, the tablecloths were clean, the silverware polished, and the food hearty and well prepared. As Isaac held her chair, Penelope was aware of the curious glances from other diners. The pregnant widow and the handsome newcomer made quite a spectacle in a town where little changed from week to week. People are staring, she murmured as Isaac took his seat across from her. Let them, he replied with a casual shrug. We're just two folks sharing a meal. Yet as their dinner progressed, Penelope found herself forgetting about the curious onlookers. Isaac was an engaging companion, sharing stories of his travels that made her laugh and asking thoughtful questions about her life that made her feel truly seen in a way she hadn't since Thomas died. Did you always want to be a rancher? She asked as they lingered over apple pie. Isaac considered this. I suppose I never questioned it. My father raised cattle, his father before him. The rhythm of ranch life is in my blood. He took a sip of coffee. But the mining work suits me too. I like solving problems, making things safer. It's important work, Penelope said softly. If the tunnels had been better supported. He reached across the table and briefly touched her hand. I can't change what happened to Thomas, Penelope, but I can try to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. The sincerity in his blue eyes made her throat tighten with emotion. Thank you, she whispered. As they walked to her cabin afterward, the autumn sun casting long shadows before them, Penelope felt a contentment she hadn't expected to find again. Isaac matched his pace to hers, occasionally offering his arm when the path grew uneven, his solid presence beside her both exciting and comforting. At her gate, they paused, neither quite ready to end the afternoon. Thank you for dinner, Penelope said. It was lovely to get out of the house. The pleasure was mine, Isaac replied. He hesitated, then asked, would it be too forward to call on you again this week? Penelope felt her heart quicken. Not at all, I'd like that. Wednesday evening, perhaps, after I finish at the mine. I'll have supper waiting, she promised. Isaac's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that made him look boyish despite his weathered features. Until Wednesday, then. He tipped his hat and turned to go, then paused. Penelope? Yes. I'm glad that fella shoved you in the market yesterday, he said with a wry grin. Though don't tell him I said so. Penelope laughed, the sound surprising her with its freedom. Your secret is safe with me, Isaac Young. She watched him walk away, his tall figure outlined against the setting sun. Only when he disappeared around the bend did she turn to enter her cabin, one hand resting on her belly where the baby kicked vigorously. Yes, she whispered to her unborn child. I like him too. The days until Wednesday passed with agonizing slowness for Penelope. She found herself watching the clock, counting the hours until Isaac's visit. On Tuesday, she rode into town to purchase fresh beef and vegetables for the stew she planned to make, ignoring Mrs. Wilson's knowing smile when their paths crossed at the general store. Having company, dear? The older woman asked innocently, eyeing Penelope's purchases. Just a thank-you dinner for Mr. Young's kindness, Penelope replied, striving for a casual tone. Of course, Mrs. Wilson nodded, her eyes twinkling. A very proper thank you, I'm sure. By Wednesday afternoon, Penelope's small cabin was spotless, the table set with her best dishes, and a savory beef stew simmered on the stove. She had just changed into a clean dress, a green calico that still fit comfortably over her growing belly when she heard a horse approaching. Smoothing her hair, Penelope took a deep breath and opened the door. Isaac was dismounting, a small package tucked under one arm. His face was smudged with coal dust, and he looked tired but brightened when he saw her. "I hope I'm not too early," he said, approaching the porch. "Right on time," she assured him. "Though you look like you've had a long day," Isaac grimaced. "Found some poorly supported sections in the west tunnel, spent most of the day shoring them up." He glanced down at his dusty clothes. "I should have cleaned up before coming." "Nonsense," Penelope said, opening the door wider. "There's wash water by the stove if you'd like to freshen up before dinner." While Isaac washed the coal dust from his face and hands, Penelope stirred the stew and sliced the fresh bread she'd baked that morning. She was suddenly nervous, aware of the domestic intimacy of the moment. "Something smells wonderful," Isaac commented, coming to stand beside her at the stove, his face now clean, hair damp at the temples. "Just a simple stew," she said modestly, though she'd spent hours preparing it. "I hope you're hungry." "Starving," he admitted. "Oh, I almost forgot." He retrieved the package he'd brought and held it out to her. A small token of appreciation for feeding a hungry cowboy. Penelope unwrapped the brown paper to find a jar of honey and a small carved wooden horse. "Isaac, they're lovely," she said, turning the beautifully crafted horse in her hands. "The honey's from Mr. Peterson's apiary," he explained. "And I whittled the horse myself. Thought your little one might like a toy when the time comes." The thoughtfulness of the gifts touched Penelope deeply. "You made this?" she asked, admiring the detail of the wooden horse. Isaac looked almost shy. "Whittling passes the time on long nights. It's nothing fancy." "It's beautiful," she insisted, placing it carefully on the mantel. "Thank you." Over dinner, Isaac told her about his first days at the mine, the changes he was implementing, and the resistance he was meeting from some of the older miners who were set in their ways. "They don't like being told they've been doing things wrong for 20 years, he explained, sopping up stew gravy with a piece of bread. "Can't say I blame them, but I won't compromise on safety." "Thomas used to come home frustrated about the same things," Penelope said. He'd mention weak support beams, poor ventilation. The foreman, then Mr. Grayson, wouldn't listen. Isaac's expression darkened. "Grayson's the reason I have this job. The owner finally saw the light after the accident that took your husband." They were silent for a moment, the memory of Thomas hanging between them. "He would have liked you," Penelope said finally. "Thomas, I mean. He respected men who stood their ground when it mattered." Isaac's eyes met hers across the table. "I wish I could have known him." After dinner, they sat by the fire, talking long into the evening. Isaac spoke of his childhood in Texas, his time fighting for the Union in the war, much to my Confederate father's dismay, and his years building his ranch in Wyoming. Penelope shared stories of teaching in the one-room schoolhouse before her marriage, her journey west with Thomas, and her hopes for her child's future. "You know if it's a boy or girl?" Isaac asked, his gaze dropping to her rounded belly. Penelope smiled, placing a hand where the baby was kicking. "No, though the midwife thinks it's a boy from how I'm carrying." "May I?" Isaac asked hesitantly, his hand hovering above her belly. Penelope nodded, guiding his large, calloused hand to where the baby was most active. A moment later, the child kicked firmly against his palm. Isaac's face transformed with wonder. "Strong little fella," he murmured. "Or lady," Penelope added with a smile. "Either way, they're making their presence known." Isaac's hand lingered for a moment longer before he withdrew it, almost reluctantly. "Thank you," he said simply. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 10, breaking the intimate spell between them. "I should go," Isaac said, rising. "You need your rest, and I've kept you up talking half the night." At the door, he hesitated. "Penelope, I've enjoyed these past few days more than I can say." "As have I," she admitted softly. "I was wondering if you might accompany me to the harvest dance on Saturday," he asked. "I understand if it's too soon or if you don't feel up to it with the baby." "I'd love to," Penelope interrupted, surprising herself with her eagerness. Isaac's smile could have lit the night sky. "I'll call for you at 6 then." On impulse, Penelope rose on tiptoes and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Isaac." His eyes widened, then softened. "Good night, Penelope," he replied, his voice husky. As she watched him ride away into the darkness, Penelope pressed a hand to her racing heart. "Oh my," she whispered to herself. "This is happening rather fast." The night of the harvest dance arrived with a flurry of snowflakes, the first of the season. Penelope stood before her mirror, critically examining her appearance. Her best dress, a deep burgundy wool with lace trim at the collar and cuffs, had been let out to accommodate her pregnancy. Her honey-brown hair was arranged in an elegant updo, with a few soft curls framing her face. "It will have to do," she told her reflection, though in truth she knew she looked well. The past few days had brought a glow to her complexion, and a sparkle to her green eyes that had been missing since Thomas's death. A knock at the door announced Isaac's arrival. When Penelope opened it, she found him standing on her porch, hat in hand, dressed in his Sunday best with the addition of a fine wool coat. His eyes widened appreciatively as he took in her appearance. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. "You're quite handsome yourself." Isaac offered his arm. "My buggy awaits, madam. I thought you shouldn't have to walk to town in your condition." The town hall was transformed for the harvest dance, with autumn leaves, dried corn husks, and pumpkins decorating every available surface. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the proceedings, and a small band played lively tunes in the corner. When Isaac and Penelope entered, there was a momentary lull in conversation as curious eyes turned their way. "Everyone's staring," Penelope murmured, gripping Isaac's arm tighter. "Let them," he replied, covering her hand with his own. "They're just admiring the prettiest woman in the room." His confidence bolstered her own, and soon they were mingling with the townsfolk. Isaac was introduced to what seemed like the entire population of Willow Creek, while Penelope fielded knowing glances and not-so-subtle inquiries from the women about her gentleman friend. When the band struck up a waltz, Isaac turned to her. "May I have this dance, if you feel up to it?" Penelope hesitated. "I'm not sure how graceful I'll be in my condition." "We'll take it slow," he promised. And so they did, moving carefully around the floor, Isaac's hand strong and steady at her waist, guiding her with gentle confidence. Penelope was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, of his clean scent of soap and pine, of the warmth in his blue eyes as he looked down at her. "People will talk," she said softly as they turned around the floor. "They're already talking," he replied with a wry smile. "Might as well give them something worth talking about." As the evening progressed, Penelope found herself relaxing, laughing more freely than she had in months. Isaac was attentive without being overbearing, bringing her punch, finding her a comfortable seat when she needed to rest, and introducing her proudly to the miners he had befriended. "Mr. Young speaks highly of your husband," one older miner told her. "Says if more men had listened to Thomas Lambert's concerns, that accident might never have happened." Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes. "Thank you for telling me that," she said. Later, as Isaac escorted her home through the gently falling snow, Penelope leaned into his warmth, grateful for his steady presence beside her. "I had a wonderful time tonight," she said as they approached her cabin. "As did I," Isaac replied, helping her down from the buggy. "Though I suspect we'll be the subject of gossip for weeks to come," Penelope laughed softly. "In a town this size, a widow being courted is the most exciting news since the Silver Strike." Isaac's step faltered. "Is that what I'm doing, Penelope, courting you?" They had reached her porch and she turned to face him, suddenly serious. "Aren't you?" In the silvery moonlight filtering through the falling snow, Isaac's face was both vulnerable and determined. "Yes," he said simply. "If you'll have me." Penelope's heart raced. "Isaac, I'm 6 months pregnant with another man's child. I know that. People will talk. Let them." "It's too soon after Thomas, is it?" he asked gently. "Only you can know that, Penelope." She looked up at him, this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly just a week ago, yet who already felt so essential to her happiness. "I still love Thomas," she whispered. "I always will." Isaac nodded. "As I will always love Sarah and James. They're part of us, Penelope. But I believe there's room in a heart for more than one love." Snow was catching in his dark hair, on his eyelashes. Without thinking, Penelope reached up to brush it away, her fingers lingering against his cheek. "I'd like to be courted by you, Isaac Young," she said softly. His smile was slow and sweet. "May I kiss you, Penelope Lambert?" In answer, she rose on tiptoes, her hand still on his cheek, guiding his face to hers. Their lips met in a tender, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as Isaac's arms came around her, careful of her belly between them. When they finally parted, both breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. Penelope's heart soared at his words. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered back. The weeks that followed were the happiest Penelope had known since before Thomas's death. Isaac called on her nearly every evening after his work at the mine, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book he thought she might enjoy, candied nuts from the general store, or another beautifully whittled toy for the baby. On Sundays, they attended church together, ignoring the whispers and smiles that followed them. Gradually, as the townspeople saw the genuine care between them, the whispers changed from scandalized to approving. Mrs. Wilson became their staunchest supporter, declaring to anyone who would listen that, "It does a heart good to see young love bloom, especially after such tragedy." December arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow. Isaac worried constantly about Penelope managing alone during the day and took to stopping by in the mornings to bring in firewood and check on her before heading to the mine. "You don't have to do this every day," Penelope protested one morning as Isaac stacked logs by her stove. "I'm perfectly capable, I know you are," he interrupted gently. "But it makes me feel better. That baby's growing bigger every day and you shouldn't be lugging heavy wood." She couldn't argue with his logic, nor did she truly want to. His daily visits had become the highlight of her mornings, as their evening conversations were the highlight of her days. As Christmas approached, Penelope's thoughts turned increasingly to the baby's arrival in January. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she voiced her fears. "I'm afraid, Isaac," she admitted, her hand resting on her now large belly. "The midwife says everything looks normal, but winter births are dangerous, and being alone." Isaac took her hand. "You're not alone, Penelope." She met his eyes. "What are we doing, Isaac? Where is this leading?" He didn't hesitate. "I want to marry you, Penelope. I think you know that." Her breath caught. "Before or after the baby comes." "Whenever you're ready," he said simply. "Tomorrow or next year I'll wait, but I want to be a father to this child, to give you both my name and protection." Tears filled Penelope's eyes. "You would do that?" Take on another man's child as your own. Isaac moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking both her hands in his. Penelope, I was there when this little one kicked against my hand for the first time. I've watched you sing to him, talk to him, prepare for his arrival. In my heart, he's already mine to love and protect. His blue eyes were earnest as they held hers. I want to be your husband and his father if you'll have me. Penelope cupped his face in her hands. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you, Isaac Young. His smile was radiant as he leaned forward to kiss her, sealing their promise. They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the church, with Mrs. Wilson and Reverend Miller as witnesses. Penelope wore her burgundy dress with a sprig of evergreen at her breast. Isaac wore his Sunday best with a matching sprig in his lapel. Their vows were traditional, but spoken with such conviction that Mrs. Wilson dabbed at her eyes throughout the ceremony. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Miller declared. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Young. Isaac's kiss was tender and reverent, his hands gentle as they cradled Penelope's face. When they turned to face the empty church as husband and wife, Penelope felt a sense of rightness that dispelled any lingering doubts. That evening, as snow fell softly outside the cabin that was now their home, Isaac carried in Penelope's wedding gift a beautiful wooden cradle he had crafted in secret over the past weeks. Isaac, it's exquisite, she gasped, running her fingers over the smooth wood, the intricate carvings of stars and moons along the sides. Every baby needs a proper place to sleep, he said, setting it by their bed. And this one's coming soon. As if in agreement, the baby kicked vigorously, making Penelope laugh. I think he approves. He, Isaac asked, raising an eyebrow. Still convinced it's a boy, mother's intuition, she replied with a smile. Their first days as husband and wife settled into a comfortable rhythm. Isaac continued his work at the mine, but arranged his schedule to return home for lunch each day to check on Penelope. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, reading or talking, or simply enjoying each other's company in companionable silence. As Penelope's due date approached, Isaac grew increasingly protective, insisting on accompanying her whenever she needed to venture into town. The baby isn't due for another 2 weeks, she reminded him as he helped her into the buggy for a trip to the general store. Babies don't always follow schedules, he replied, tucking a blanket around her legs against the January cold. And I don't want you getting stranded in a snowstorm. His concern touched her deeply. Thomas had been a good husband, but he had never quite grasped the physical challenges of pregnancy. Isaac seemed to anticipate her needs before she could voice them. At the general store, Penelope gathered the last few items needed for the baby while Isaac chatted with the proprietor about the latest news from Denver. She was examining a display of baby bonnets when a sharp pain gripped her abdomen, causing her to gasp and clutch the counter for support. Penelope. Isaac was instantly at her side, his arm around her waist. What is it? I'm fine, she assured him as the pain subsided. Just a twinge. But when a second pain followed 10 minutes later as they were loading their purchases into the buggy, Isaac's worried expression deepened. We're going straight to the midwife, he declared, helping her up into the seat. Mrs. Blackburn, the town's experienced midwife, took one look at Penelope and nodded sagely. This baby's coming today, not 2 weeks from now, she announced after a brief examination. First babies often come early. Isaac paled slightly but remained steady. What do we do? Get her home and comfortable, Mrs. Blackburn instructed, gathering her supplies. I'll be along shortly, and Mr. Young, you might want to prepare yourself for a long night. The labor progressed more quickly than anyone anticipated. By nightfall, Penelope's pains were coming steadily, and Mrs. Blackburn had taken up residence in the bedroom, issuing calm instructions as she prepared for the birth. Isaac had been banished to the main room of the cabin but refused to leave the house despite Mrs. Blackburn's assurances that men traditionally waited elsewhere during childbirth. "I'm staying right here," he insisted, pacing the floor. "She's my wife." When Penelope's cries grew more intense, Isaac couldn't bear it any longer. He burst into the bedroom, ignoring Mrs. Blackburn's protests, and went directly to Penelope's side, taking her hand. "I'm here," he said, brushing sweat-dampened hair from her forehead. "I'm right here, Penelope." "Isaac," she gasped, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "It hurts." "I know, love," he murmured. "But you're the strongest woman I know. You can do this." Mrs. Blackburn watched them for a moment, then sighed in resignation. "Well, if you're staying, make yourself useful. Support her back when she pushes." And so Isaac stayed, holding Penelope through each contraction, whispering encouragement, wiping her brow, and being everything she needed him to be in those long, painful hours. Just after midnight, with a final, exhausted push from Penelope and a flurry of activity from Mrs. Blackburn, a new cry filled the cabin, strong, indignant, and unmistakably healthy. "You have a son, Mrs. Young," the midwife announced, wrapping the squalling infant in a clean blanket. Tears streamed down Penelope's face as the tiny bundle was placed in her arms. "Hello, little one," she whispered, counting fingers and toes with wonder. "We've been waiting for you." Isaac leaned over them both, his own eyes wet with tears. "He's perfect," he said, his voice choked with emotion. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, they were the deep blue of all newborns. His tiny fist waved in the air before latching onto Isaac's offered finger with surprising strength. "Strong grip," Isaac said with a watery laugh. "He'll make a fine cowboy someday." After Mrs. Blackburn had cleaned up and departed, promising to return in the morning, Isaac and Penelope lay side by side on their bed, the baby sleeping peacefully between them. "What shall we name him?" Isaac asked, gently stroking the infant's cheek with one finger. Penelope looked up at her husband, her heart so full of love she thought it might burst. "I was thinking Thomas Isaac Lambert Young," she said softly, "to honor both his fathers." Isaac's eyes filled with tears again. "Are you sure?" "Very sure," she replied. Thomas would want his son to know where he came from, but also to know the man who chose to be his father. Isaac leaned across the sleeping baby to kiss her tenderly. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips, "for this gift, for our family." As winter gave way to spring, the young household settled into a new rhythm centered around little Tommy, as they called him. The baby thrived under the loving attention of both his parents, growing stronger and more alert with each passing day. Isaac proved to be a natural father, as comfortable changing diapers and walking a fussy baby at night as he was managing minors or breaking horses. He would often carry Tommy in a sling against his chest as he did chores around the homestead, talking to the baby as if he were an old friend. "Your daddy's building us a bigger house come summer," he would tell the attentive infant as he chopped wood or mended fences. "With a proper nursery for you and maybe a brother or sister someday, if your mama agrees." Penelope would watch them from the doorway, her heart swelling with love for this man who had embraced fatherhood with such joy and commitment. The shadows of grief that had once haunted both their eyes had faded, replaced by the bright light of new love and purpose. In April, Isaac came home from the mine with exciting news. "Mr. Sullivan has offered me a partnership in the mine," he announced over dinner. 10% ownership in exchange for my continued management of operations." Penelope's eyes widened. "Isaac, that's wonderful." "There's more," he said, his blue eyes sparkling with excitement. He mentioned that old Jenkins' place is up for sale, the ranch about 5 miles south of town. 500 acres, good water rights, decent grazing land. The place with the big white farmhouse. Penelope asked, remembering the property. Isaac nodded. With my share of the mine profits and our savings, we could buy it. Start building that cattle ranch Thomas dreamed of, that I've dreamed of too. Penelope reached across the table to take his hand. Is that what you want? To go back to ranching. It's in my blood, he admitted. I could keep working at the mine part-time while we build the herd. In a few years, maybe turn the mine management over to someone else entirely. He squeezed her hand. But only if it's what you want too, Penelope. You and Tommy are my priority. I think, she said slowly, that Tommy's father should follow his heart, and I think a ranch would be a wonderful place to raise our son and perhaps those siblings you've been promising him. Isaac's face lit up. Really? You'd want more children? Penelope smiled, her green eyes warm with love. With you? Absolutely. That summer they purchased the Jenkins Ranch, which they renamed the Double Circle, combining the brands from both Isaac's former Wyoming ranch and the one Thomas had designed but never used. The spacious farmhouse needed work, but Isaac tackled the repairs with enthusiasm, adding a nursery and a larger kitchen at Penelope's request. By fall, they had moved in, and Isaac had acquired the first 20 head of cattle, the modest beginning of what they both hoped would become a substantial herd. Penelope planted a garden twice the size of the one at the cabin and started talking about adding chickens and perhaps a milk cow. Tommy, now crawling and babbling, thrived in the open spaces of the ranch, his dark hair and bright eyes drawing comments from visitors about how much he resembled his father, meaning Isaac, though only the family knew the distinction. On Tommy's first birthday, in January of 1878, they held a small celebration at the ranch. Mrs. Wilson and several other friends from town made the journey despite the winter weather, bearing gifts and good wishes for the child who had brought so much joy to the young household. After the guests had departed and Tommy was tucked into his crib, exhausted from the excitement, Isaac and Penelope stood on the porch of their home, his arm around her waist as they looked out over their land. Happy? He asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Very, she replied, leaning into his embrace. Are you? More than I ever thought possible again, Isaac said honestly. After I lost Sarah and James, I thought that part of my life was over. I never imagined I'd be blessed with another chance at happiness. Penelope turned in his arms to face him. I have something to tell you, she said, her green eyes shining in the moonlight. Isaac raised an eyebrow. Oh. Taking his hand, she placed it gently on her stomach. Tommy's going to be a big brother come summer. Joy spread across Isaac's face, making him look years younger. A baby, our baby, Penelope nodded, laughing as he lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. Our baby, she confirmed when he set her down. A little brother or sister for Tommy. Isaac knelt before her, pressing his ear to her still flat stomach as if he might hear the tiny life within. Hello, little one, he whispered. Your papa can't wait to meet you. Rising to his feet again, he cupped Penelope's face in his hands. I love you, Penelope Young. More than I have words to express. And I love you, she replied, her heart full to bursting. My cowboy who shielded me in the market and changed my life with a loaf of bread. As they sealed their joy with a kiss, snow began to fall gently around them, dusting their shoulders and hair with crystalline flakes that glittered in the moonlight. Neither noticed the cold, wrapped as they were in the warmth of their love and the promise of their growing family. In the years that followed, the Double Circle Ranch prospered under Isaac's capable management. The cattle herd grew, as did the young family. That summer, Penelope gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Elizabeth, after Isaac's first wife and Penelope's mother. 2 years later, another son joined the family, James Thomas, honoring both the son Isaac had lost and the man who had been Tommy's biological father. Tommy grew into a strong, thoughtful boy who shared Isaac's natural affinity for horses and Penelope's love of books. Though he knew the story of his birth and his biological father's legacy, he never doubted for a moment that Isaac was his true father in all the ways that mattered. "Pa," he asked one evening when he was 10, as Isaac taught him to mend a saddle, "do you ever wish I was really yours? By blood, I mean." Isaac set down his tools and looked the boy straight in the eye. "Tommy, the day your mother placed you in my arms, you became mine. Blood doesn't make a family, love does. And I have loved you from the first moment I felt you kick in your mother's belly." The boy nodded, satisfied, and returned to his work, his small hands mimicking Isaac's movements with growing confidence. Penelope, watching from the doorway with baby James on her hip and Sarah clutching her skirt, felt her heart swell with gratitude for the life they had built together. Later that night, as they lay in bed with moonlight streaming through the window, Penelope traced the laugh lines that had deepened around Isaac's eyes over the years. "You ever think about that day in the market?" she asked. "How different our lives might be if that man hadn't pushed me, or if you hadn't been there." Isaac caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I believe we would have found each other somehow," he said. "Some things are meant to be. Like us?" she asked with a smile. "Exactly like us," he agreed, pulling her closer. "I thank God every day for giving me the good sense to shield a beautiful pregnant woman in the market and buy her a loaf of bread." "The best 2 bits you ever spent," Penelope teased, nestling against his chest. "The best investment of my life," Isaac corrected, his voice growing serious. "It brought me you and Tommy and everything that followed." As they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, the sounds of their ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the gentle creak of the windmill, the soft breathing of their children in nearby rooms created a lullaby of contentment around them. Their love story, begun in an unexpected moment of kindness in a dusty market square, had blossomed into a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined in their darkest days of grief. Through joy and sorrow, through the challenges of building a ranch and raising a family, they had remained each other's anchor and greatest blessing. And though the town of Willow Creek would remember many things about Isaac and Penelope Young over the decades that followed their successful ranch, their generous contributions to the community, their 4 children who grew to be respected citizens in their own right, perhaps the most enduring legacy was the lesson their love had taught. That second chances at happiness can come in the most unexpected moments, and that a simple act of kindness can change the course of lives forever.